Jones versus Combs, Part 14. Let's see. Going down to 280, defendants Justin Combs, Christina Corm, and her direct reports, Brendan Paul, Frankie Santella, and Moy Ben and his employees, and its employees had actual knowledge that they were aiding, abetting, and inducing Combs and his co-conspirators' sexual abuse and sex trafficking conspiracy to recruit, solicit, entice, court, harbor, transport, obtain, and provide Mr. Combs, as well as others, into commercial sex acts through the means of force, threats of force, fraud, abuse of process, and coercion. Defendants knew and should have known that Mr. Combs had engaged in violations of the TVPA. Despite such knowledge, defendants intentionally paid for and abetted, aided, and induced Combs' violation, which constituted perpetrating violations of those laws. And then it lists the defendants again. Knew and acted in reckless disregard of the fact that Combs would coerce, defraud, and force Mr. Jones to engage in commercial sex acts. And I'm not going to continue to read the rest. It's pretty much as like the previous page was. So you'll be able to see that. Now, number 286 goes on to say that the defendant's outrageous and intentional conduct in this case is part of a pattern and practice of defendants profiting by undertaking illegal high risk, high reward sponsorships and partnerships. Okay. And so again, he wants them to be liable for his damages and reasonable attorney fees. Let's go down to the 10th cause of action. Denied for sexual assault against defendant Jane Doe 1, Young Miami's cousin. Jane Doe 1's conduct created unreasonable risk of causing emotional distress to plaintiff, and Jane Doe 1 knew or should have known that such conduct was likely to result in emotional distress that might or unlikely would cause illness or bodily harm. Plaintiff's emotional distress was foreseeable to Jane Doe 1. As a direct and proximate result of the negligent conduct of Jane Doe 1, plaintiff suffered and will continue to suffer severe emotional distress. Jane Doe 1's conduct was wanton, malicious, willful, and or cruel, entitling the plaintiff to punitive damages. Okay, now let's go on to the 11th cause of action against Mr. Assault, against Mr. Combs, Nyed for sexual assault. Mr. Jones incorporates by reference all preceding paragraphs and realleges them as if set forth fully herein. Diddy's conduct created an unreasonable risk of causing emotional distress to the plaintiff, and Diddy knew or should have known that such conduct was likely to result in emotional distress that might or likely would cause illness or bodily harm. And it's basically going on to say the same thing. 12th cause of action, Nayef for sexual assault. Defendant Jane Doe 1, Young Miami cousin. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't rereading the same thing. I'm not. Jane Doe 1 engaged in conduct towards plaintiff that is extreme and outrageous to exceed the bounds of decency in a civilized society, namely by inter alia, subjecting him to sexual assault and misconduct. And then he goes on to say the same thing. And then 13 cause of action against Mr. Combs, the same thing. Except he says the sexual assault and misconduct by Mr. Combs was extreme and outrageous conduct that shocks the conscience. These actions were taken with the intent to cause a disregard for the substantial probability of causing severe emotional distress. As a direct and proximate result of Mr. Combs' extreme and outrageous conduct, plaintiff has suffered severe emotional distress. 18th cause of action, knowing beneficiary in a sex trafficking venture in violation of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. Defendants Lucian Charles Grange, Ethiopia, Motown Records, Love Records, and Universal Music Group. This goes on. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's about them providing large amounts of cash to Diddy, and it was the quid pro quo to receiving financial benefits from Diddy. And this goes on to them participating in the sex trafficking venture. Okay. The cash directly formed part of the commercial nature of the sex acts. The cash was also a necessary and required part of Mr. Combs' recruitment of plaintiff Jones, as well as other sex workers, prostitutes, and underage minors. By providing cash that the defendants knew would be used to fund the sex trafficking venture, the defendants actively participated in the recruitment of the venture. The cash that the defendants provided went far beyond providing routine sponsorship, partnership, and employer compensation for a subordinate. It was far from routine for defendants to provide substantial sums of cash per year to Mr. Combs, who did not have an apparent legitimate need for such extravagant sums. The sheer number of listening parties, and that was in parentheses, yacht parties, and nighttime writers' camps at the parties, which defendants sponsored, went far beyond normal for the music industry. Defendants knew or should have known they were feeding Mr. Combs' sexual deviancy. Moreover, the circumstances in which Mr. Combs was requesting such large amounts were far from routine and should have raised numerous red flags, taking it well outside routine circumstances. The defendants providing large sums of cash to Mr. Combs under the circumstances of this case were entirely inconsistent with the ordinary duties of a record label, music group, publishing partner, or an employer-employee. The reason the defendants ignored the numerous red flags about Diddy was to receive financial benefits from Diddy and his sex trafficking ventures. Defendants knew that it would gain far from routine financial benefits by ignoring the red flags associated with Combs and by participating in his sex trafficking ventures. A. Among the concrete steps that the defendants took to aid and abet in the Combs sex trafficking venture will open up numerous lines of credit for Mr. Combs' production of the Love album, his related entities, and associates. By opening these lines of credits and by consistently sponsoring his freak-off parties, defendants received many benefits from participating in Mr. Combs' venture. The sponsoring of these events was affirmative conduct that caused defendants to receive these benefits. B. Among the concrete steps that defendants took to aid the Combs sex trafficking venture between about 2000 and continuing through about November 2023, defendants concealed its delivery of vast sums of cash, likely millions of dollars, to Diddy and his associates. In order to benefit from the Diddy sex trafficking venture, defendants willfully failed to timely file required tax disclosures surrounding the funding of these sex trafficking parties with the federal government, because doing so would imperil its ability to profit from the sex trafficking venture. Defendants' concealment of the cash transactions caused it to receive financial benefits through continuation of the Diddy sex trafficking venture. Among the concrete steps that defendants took to aid the Combs sex trafficking venture were its failure to follow AML requirements. This failure was not just passive facilitation, but a deliberate omission by defendants. This admission was a specific act of concealment which allowed Combs to continue funding his sex trafficking venture through suspicious transactions that would otherwise been prevented. This is the end. Let's go to the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, you guys.